Hi everyone. This talk is titled Don't Ask Why in Code Review. And it's not going to be a technical deep dive into anything really. Good thing, because it's the last talk of the evening and I'm sure you're all very tired. So it's going to be just sort of light entertainment. My name is Minna and I'm a developer. I've given this talk before at a meetup called Set State back in October last year. Some of you may have been there, so if you've seen this already, I don't mind if you want to head to the pub already, that's fine, because it's roughly the same thing as before. I used to work at a company called Futurists. They're hiring full stack developers right now. Anyone looking for new opportunities, I can tell you it's a great place to work. And I'll be helping out a company called Kantan build some React Native stuff starting next week. They're also hiring React Native developers specifically, so come and talk to me if anyone is interested. This talk is going to be structured like this. First, we're just going to get on the same page of what do we mean when we talk about code review. We're going to then dive into the title of the talk, which is Don't Ask Why you shouldn't ask why. Then I'm going to give you some further practical advice on how you can start improving the way that you do code reviews starting tomorrow. And then I'll give you some concluding commentary. Now, what is code review? Most of us probably have gone through this process before. You write some code, then you push your changes to somewhere like GitHub or GitLab where other people can see your changes. You make a pull request. Your code is reviewed by your colleagues on your team. Usually, they'll probably request some changes. Then you can amend your code. And eventually, your code is approved and can be merged into whatever master or equivalent branch. And the purpose of code review, of course, is to improve the quality of code. So it goes from good quality to really good quality. Code review is all about quality assurance. It's making the code and the product better. Now, code review, we have to remember, is a small part of quality assurance. There's more to quality assurance. There's automated tests, manual tests, design reviews, and all of this stuff. But code review definitely is about making things better. And the kind of fundamental question we're trying to answer when we do code review is, of course, is the code good? When you are someone who's written code and it's being reviewed, this question, however, can really morph in your head easily into another question, which is my code good? And then this, in turn, can easily morph into, am I a good coder? Now, we all know that code itself doesn't have feelings. However, humans have feelings. This is not a human, by the way, this is a dog. Now, this talk was inspired by a quote I read from a very, very excellent book. It goes like this: regardless of what language why is translated into, it's accusatory. Now, this may strike us as surprising, because when we use the word why in casual conversation, we use it sort of like, why is that? But when in code review, we write why, it's on the receiver's end to interpret how the why is said. And it's a very powerful word and can be interpreted wrong very easily. So you're like, oh, why did you do this? But the other person interprets it as, why did you do this? Why did you write code like that? Why is this here and not there, right? Let's take an example. Two programmers, Football and Balloon. Now, Balloon has written some code, and Football has kindly reviewed the code that Balloon has written. Football comments on this code and says, why multi-line comment syntax here and not the same as 4 lines before? Innocent enough question. But for Balloon, this might easily feel like, what? Like, are you stupid or something? How could you miss that? It's obvious. And they'll feel like, oh, well, I'm sorry. Didn't mean it. Now, please don't misunderstand. Giving up on the word why isn't about giving up on quality. Not at all. I'll try and explain this a little bit using a thing called radical candor framework. And you can read more about it from Kim Scott's excellent book. Now, when we do code review, the whole point of code review is to challenge your colleagues. It's about making the code better, and you need that challenge there. But in order to really make good feedback work, you have to also show empathy. Otherwise, things may come across as obnoxiously aggressive by accident. Now, we don't want to accidentally not challenge people, but we also don't want to be too aggressive. Ideally, we could challenge and empathize at the same time. And I think this is important because code review is all about feedback. It is a feedback situation where we are giving feedback to each other in a team. Now, the word why may not be the best choice of word when you're doing code review, but luckily there are other words. You could say, perhaps this could be changed to, or it looks like this is, or can this be made more like, or I'm not sure I understand yet. Could you clarify? And the reason why we want to avoid the word why is we want to avoid those negative feelings. Because when we go through this loop and then we feel bad after we accidentally think that our colleague, who wasn't actually angry, but we perceived them as being angry, then we'll remember this feedback loop with negative feelings and we'll find it more difficult to learn. So to get to good quality, if we could make the whole code review process a happy one, a one where we can all feel good about receiving and giving feedback, then we'll also more readily learn and we'll write better code because happy teams are productive teams. So I would argue strongly that the secret to good quality software is good code review culture. So the first piece of advice in this talk is don't ask why. Now, I will go on to giving 7 more pieces of advice, but much more quickly. Tip number 2, format your comments as an observation. Here's the same example as before, but in a slightly different way. Football instead says, it looks like there's an inconsistency in the comment syntax. What this does is it allows Balloon to react as, oh yeah, I see that too. It's not about you and me anymore. It's about the code. It takes the human out of the equation. So instead of anyone feeling like I suck at coding because they received a comment like, why did you write that code? They'll feel more like, oh yeah, whatever, lol. And then that enforces a feeling of sort of trust in your team. Now, tip number 3, much in the same vein, is use emojis. It turns out that even neutral emojis are really good at just slightly lifting the mood, and they make you feel like, oh yeah, that person doesn't hate me. They used a hamburger emoji. They're not angry, right? And here's an example. My favorite one is when I see a typo somewhere. Usually it's in a comment or something. Then I'll just put like a articulated lawyer or something. Here's a typo. Observation, emoji. Tip number 4. When giving feedback, suggest actionable alternatives. Let's take another example. Here, Telephone is making a comment on these 3 lines. They're saying the code could be more concise if we omit the declaration of the spinner value variable like, and then there's a clear example in code. Now it turns out that actually people don't hate it if you just write an example piece of code for them. You might think, oh, people don't want me to write their code for them, but it does clarify exactly what you mean. And it's very useful in particular if you're commenting on like multiple lines of code. Hey, what if we could make this like this instead? Because we're programmers, we talk in code. So think of it as using the language that we all know how to read and know how to communicate with. Tip number 5, find something nice to say. Now, this one is kind of obvious, but in a way, this has been misunderstood. I've received some feedback from this talk last time I did it, that being nice isn't really what code review is about. And I agree, kind of. But there's this kind of common misconception about how one should give feedback, which is the shit sandwich, which is you begin your code review with something nice, then you just kind of dish out the awful stuff, and then as long as you round it up nicely, then everything will be okay, right? Because you said something nice. But that's not the point of saying something nice. So let's go back to the radical candor framework again. when we're doing that, then we're kind of falling into these weird zones, because sort of saying something nice isn't about not challenging directly. We don't need to go there. The only thing we want to avoid is accidentally falling into obnoxious aggression. Now, the way that we can give positive feedback in radical candor is by meaning what you say and by being quite specific about the things that you're commenting on. Specific feedback is always better than vague feedback. Saying, oh, good job, isn't as good as that particular thing that you did was good and it surprised me. Here's an example. Pancakes says, I like how you've written this auto-collapsing functionality, referring to 4 lines. It's rather elegant. Specific, much better than good job. Now, we're going to go a little bit into some more advanced topics of code review. So the other person just doesn't agree, and I've been arguing in this pull request for a long time. Should I keep arguing? How many people have had this experience? At least a couple, maybe about 30%. Well, I'll tell you, it happens quite often. Anyway, the answer is maybe you should keep arguing. Sometimes it's really good to keep arguing, especially if there are obvious errors in the code, right? That's the whole point of quality assurance, the whole point of code review, to make it better. Now, I'm talking about errors, not like issues. So the other thing is when code does not comply with the agreed standards. And by agreed standards, I mean whatever your team has agreed to together. Obviously, if you've made a commitment as a team to comply to certain standards, then yeah, then you comply to them. Otherwise, you have to have a whole meeting with your team again. However, you may not want to argue so much if it's about code style. This one may strike some people as obvious, but using something like a tool like Prettier, which is an auto-formatting tool, which takes your linting rules, and when you're writing code, it will format your code for you, so you never even have to think about complying with the linting rules. These are great for reducing the overhead of code review, the sort of mental overhead of having to keep everything in line. Thoroughly recommend. Another time when arguing may not be such a good idea is when you have concerns about someone's code, but you can't really suggest something actionable. For example, I'm not sure how this function will perform under all circumstances. That's fair if you can give an example under which circumstance you would like the author to test or how you would recommend it's changed. But just rejecting a PR pull request, because you have concerns but you're not sure what we should do is a bit not such a great idea. And this usually happens when someone's written a very large pull request and you're kind of like, there's something iffy about this, but I don't know what. So one tip is also just make small pull requests, by the way. And another time is when it's about the future. Now, when we talk about the future in pull requests, in code review, we might reach a thing called deadlock, where we just cannot find any resolution to which way we should do things. For example, Balloon says, is the code future-proof? Think about the potential use cases, about the features we will build next month. Can this code be reused? And I liked how Michelle was talking about this whole same thing. Sometimes duplication is better than making the wrong abstraction, and we shouldn't kind of think too far into the future, because we don't know the future. But Football then retorts with, we may not even build those features. Let's not waste time future-proofing code when we don't know what the future holds. I wouldn't say Balloon or Football are necessarily, either one of them is right or wrong, because software development at the end of the day is all about trade-offs. I mean, it might be situation-specific, what you should do. But the future is something that causes code review deadlock very easily. Now, the easiest way to resolve this situation is always just to go to your colleague's desk. Hash it out in person, right? If you're remote, then maybe instead do a one-to-one in your chat or something. But it's good if it's one-to-one, because then it's faster. Because when you're commenting on a pull request, the speed you're going at is pretty much like an old-school messaging forum. It's not, it'll take time, and we don't want to waste time when we're building, business applications. Tip number 7 kind of follows. You can defer to a third person as well. So let's take an example. Here, Pancakes is reviewing Telephone's code. They're doing a lot of things right. They're observing. This line gets highlighted as unreachable code in my IDE. They're putting an emoji in. Then Telephone kind of retorts with, your idea is correct, but I'm not convinced this is a good idea. Pancakes then says, okay, well, Telephone's response in person was no. So they try to resolve at the desk, but still deadlock remains because they cannot resolve this together. Then Football comes in, just a third person. It doesn't have to be a senior person or the tech lead or anything, but sometimes just introducing another person's opinion can really smooth it all out, and then the participants are much more willing to commit because now there can be a consensus of some kind. This idea is called disagree and commit. You can't necessarily agree on everything, but when the time comes that you have to choose something, then you're not going to complain forever about it not being your preferred solution. Described excellently in Patrick Lencioni's The Advantage, which I also recommend. Now, the final piece of advice that I would give is that sometimes in code review, you just have to let it go, right? It's not really that big a deal. I mean, you probably have tests, right? Because the thing is, code review is just a portion of quality assurance. It's not the whole thing. There's going to be those tests. There's also going to be your users at the end of the day from whom you'll receive feedback if things are broken as hell. Like, obviously try not to break, everything. Try not to drop the production database table, but even if you do, hopefully you have backups. Remember that code review is just one cog, one gate in the process. So sometimes it's okay if bad code enters master. And I just want to leave you with one final thought, a concluding thought. I have been talking all about how you as individuals can give good feedback to your colleagues. But I want you to remember as well that equally important is receiving feedback. The key player in a feedback situation is not the giver, but the receiver. What we mean by this is we can only control how we receive feedback. We receive feedback from all over, from everyone who hasn't seen this talk, from everyone like our parents, right? We receive feedback from our dog who's angry, that kind of thing. So all we can do is try and understand where people are coming from and understand that giving feedback is also a skill, and not everyone has developed those skills. So when next time in code review someone asks, why did you do that? Just remember, it's not because they're angry. It's probably just because they don't realize how it's coming across. So that's all. Thanks.